got a UK first for you. Can I get a round of applause for that? Something very, very special is coming to the TEDx Teesside stage. A live podcast recording. Yes, you're going to be in the audience of a live podcast recording. We're going to be joined by Charlotte Nichols, host of PRsonal Podcast. This is the business podcast where nothing is off limits. PRsonal is celebrating its 50th episode. That's huge. A round of applause for a 50th episode. And they're marking that with a live special edition at TedXTeessideWomen. Launched with the aim of addressing topics deemed too taboo for the workplace, the series has so far tackled everything from FGM, suicide, trans issues, and human trafficking. And for this edition, you've got an amazing guest to enjoy. Yasmin Khan will be in the PRsonal hot seat. She's a government advisor, founder of the award-winning Halo Project. Yasmin has worked tirelessly to end violence against women and girls, and this promises to be one of the best episodes yet. Please join me in welcoming Charlotte Nichols and Yasmin Khan to the stage. Enjoy. Enjoy.
Yasmin, what has been the most significant challenge that you've faced in your life?
One of the most significant challenges is, as you can tell from my accent, I'm not from the Northeast. I'm an Essex girl, so don't hold that against me. No white shoes, dancing around a handbag. But one of the most difficult parts of my life was to leave a home, to leave my work, to leave my friends and move to an area that I had very little contact and connection with, and that was the northeast of England. It became extremely challenging because I was afforded freedom, I was afforded opportunities, and I was given choices. When I came here, I was removed from those luxuries, so to call. So there was restrictions on the clothes I should wear and could wear. There were restrictions on who I could speak to, and there were restrictions about whether I could work or not. So ultimately, that was the biggest challenge of my entire life. But the things that really signified the resilience in me was something, and we've heard about feminism, we've heard about men's role to play in advancing gender equality. My husband and my current husband is one of those stalwarts who really pushes forward for equality. But my challenges were overcome by my father, who came from the South Asian culture, migrated typically in the 60s, had no language. He learnt very quickly about the benefits of doing good, but doing well for others. So he started working in the community, and he always taught me two things. He said, always believe and always have passion in what you do. I didn't have belief at the time when I moved to a brand new area. I worked in the city. I worked for an international airline. I thought that those opportunities would be available to me. But something inside me really held on to my father's advice, and men allies are so important in combating gender stereotypes. And he always believed that by being resilient and having a very strong passion, you can achieve. So those were the two things that really saw me through.
Brilliant, and totally agree about that as well. And how about your career? What sort of challenges have you faced to get to where you have got to today?
How long have we got, Charlotte? One of the biggest challenges, I think, for me personally in my career has been to challenge the status quo for others. We hear about voices, that everybody has a voice, but sometimes it's really important that you become the voice of others. I'll take you back to a tragic incident that happened in Middlesbrough, no doubt, a murder of Jessica Patel. And as any murder happens, a panel is put together to look at the lessons learned. This panel was very challenging. It had all the public bodies on there who have got a statutory duty to protect, but what they were not doing is recognising that Jessica was killed in an honour killing. I had to challenge every bit of resource in me, in that guidance, in research, in good practice, to demonstrate this was no ordinary killing. This young spirit was taken far too early because of the honour codes that existed. And I can still remember to this day going into the panel on a regular basis to challenge the decisions that policing and other public bodies had, because they just simply didn't understand the specific barriers to why she didn't come forward for support. And that challenge had a profound impact on me, because it was part of my work that I had to advocate the rights of women and to provide that voice for Jessica. But what was really challenging is challenging organisations that believe what they're doing is what they know. Sometimes it's really important to recognise we may not know what other diverse women are experiencing, but be open, listen to the facts, and listen to the reasons why specific women in specific groups do not have the support around them to come forward. So I can still go back to a place where I'm so frustrated by that learning, but at least now she has been identified as a victim of honour killing, which her family completely supported. And we are now shining a light on what more services need to do to ensure that they are recognised and that they are heard and listened to.
Absolutely, and your charity was set up to help these poor women who face this sort of violence, FGM, honour killing, as you've mentioned. I find it so hard to believe that still happens, and it happens in our local area.
If we look at some of the statistics that are available in UK data, 1 in 5 women experience domestic abuse, 1 in 4 women experience sexual abuse. And domestic abuse is very, very broad. The Act was introduced in 2021, and it includes honour-based abuse. One of the things that was really important in setting up the charity was listening to women's experiences of not accessing the jobs that they wanted, of not going on to further education. And I think if we take a whole systems approach to tackling violence against women and girls, you've got to look at the root cause. Often, the perpetrators were their parents. Often, the perpetrators were conforming to a code which gave women no choice. And men are affected by that, of course. So having a specific charity in the North East, the Halo Project, has really helped over 5,000 women. It's not just about giving advice, there's emergency accommodation, there's recovery programs, and I work with the most powerful women to make sure that when somebody comes forward, we have the opportunity to change the future generations in that family. And I work with the most amazing team, some of whom are here today, who really help achieve that ambition at Halo.
Incredible. It's incredible the work that you do as part of that charity. We've talked about challenges. Do you feel that as a woman of colour, you've had to face more challenges than, say, a woman or a man who, a standard white person?
Yeah. I think we all face challenges. I think sometimes those challenges can be very, very different. Of course, growing up in London, we saw a taste of it, sadly, in Middlesbrough. But I grew up with the National Front, having marches, where on those particular days, you do not go out. I have been part of a political regime which has fueled far-right ideology, and unfortunately that has had an impact on me. Nowadays, it's really important to recognise discrimination can be very, very covert. We talk about political correctness, but I have experienced discrimination because I'm a woman. I have experienced discrimination because of my ethnicity and because of my faith. And all of those 3 areas of discrimination impact very differently. I think one of the key things I have really come to realise is just when you think you belong, you're reminded that you don't. But I think it's really important for you to build an army of people around you who support you, who accept you for who you are, and speak up for you. Because I said to somebody in the break earlier on today, the day I stop challenging racial and gender stereotypes and somebody does that for me, I think I can retire. So I think there's some amazing advocates and allies that you need to surround yourself to just reaffirm who you are and to be proud of what you believe in and make sure that discrimination doesn't stop the journey you're on.
Brilliant answer. And did you feel threatened by the riots that happened in the summer in Middlesbrough?
I think this was one of the most darkest days in this region. I was personally affected by the riots that happened in Middlesbrough. I saw the footage on mainstream global media and friends and people who I know across the world who actually were texting to see if I was okay. I thought I left the National Front and been not accepted for who I am way back in London. What Middlesbrough's riots reminded me of is there are still individuals and groups that don't feel that there's a place for us here. The riots impacted on my staff, my team, my trustees. My trustee's daughter was walking on Saturday and she was spat on. My daughter was at a henna celebration where they were locked into a building for their own safety. My team member, the riots happened on the Saturday, went out and she was confronted by racism. This was deeply impacting on me. You know, I consider myself to be strong. I consider myself to be able to challenge. But I remember sitting down, watching the news, because on Wednesday when the riots were due to come back, Middlesbrough was a no-go area. We were all in our homes. And it felt like the pandemic where you weren't allowed to go out. Now, how do you rebuild yourself after that? People help you rebuild yourself. People who are anti-racist tell you how appalled they are. And you galvanize that movement and that solidarity. And there are amazing people in Teesside who really challenge that behaviour and that ideology. And I think that is so powerful for your recovery.
Absolutely. And in terms of racism, do you feel that things are getting better or worse?
In my experience, things haven't progressed in the way that they should have done. We have the amazing Equality Act. We have, you know, real leadership in some places. But women and people from the black and minoritized communities, as with other marginalized groups, are hugely underrepresented in boards that make key decisions around the economy and public policy. We have huge issues around positive action. You know, there is huge underrepresentation. And when was the last time I was asked to go back to my country? Probably a year ago. So it does exist. Is it getting better? The voices are becoming stronger. Unfortunately, I don't see the progression in which I would have hoped it would have been in 2024. We have such a long way to go. And I tell you why and who is responsible for all this. Politicians. We've got key decision makers. We've got people who do not represent who we are. And sometimes, yes, we all have a voice, but our voice should be there for others. Yes, we've approached this particular and crashed the glass ceiling, but we've got to keep relentlessly pursuing that journey of equality, because quite frankly, what the riots in Middlesbrough taught us and across the UK is that we cannot stop. We have to continue.
Absolutely. And as us as individuals, what can we all do to help change that, to help increase that diversity?
When I work in the domestic abuse field, there's a really strong quote that goes around, and it says, domestic abuse is everybody's business. Being accepted and making sure that we push forward for equality is everybody's business. And I'll compare that to an example when men sometimes get a bashing about them always being the perpetrators. And we've seen from statistics how domestic abuse is gendered. Not all men are perpetrators, but all women have experienced some form of sexual assault or unwanted sexual attention. That's a fact. Likewise, when it comes to what everybody's role is in pushing forward that equality door, is making sure that you do not become bystanders to discrimination. If somebody's saying something in your social circle which is really discriminatory and derogatory, and you may not agree with it, it's time for you to speak up. If you're around people where decisions are being made about appointments in recruitment, retention, and selection, and you don't agree with those decisions and you see bias, call it out. I've been working on a few independent reviews Recently, I worked on the London Fire Brigade's independent culture review, which looked at the terrible misogyny and racial discrimination in the London Fire Brigade, which kick-started so many other independent reviews. I have never been so appalled by leaders who saw that behaviour and colluded with others to conceal the behaviour that was simply inappropriate. I hold them accountable just as much as the perpetrators who were abusing women and abusing their power. So let's change the narrative about everybody's business but our responsibility. Bystanders have a real role to play in advancing equality for all groups.
That's a really powerful phrase. And why do you think they don't call it out enough, these leaders?
Because sometimes they're part of the problem themselves. They don't want to be seen to be unpopular. They don't want to challenge their friends, their colleagues. They don't want to, go against a policy that is going to be really difficult to implement and more work for them. Sometimes they take the easy option, and again, going back to my father, he said to me two things before he passed away. He said, there's always two ways to do something. There's the easy option and there's a hard option. The easy option may not always be the right choice. And I think if you live by that, you've got to call it out wherever it exists.
That's so true. Right, we're going back to your childhood, Yasmin. Were there any defining moments?
I think for me, one of the most defining moments was when I was walking home from, like you have Sunday schools, we learn how to read Arabic. And in doing Arabic, I had to wear a particular modest dress. And I remember walking home with my brother. I must have been under 10. I think I was probably about 7, excuse my memory. And I remember walking home and there were two people who were standing at the shop we were going into. And it was a crowded road. And one of them pulled my headscarf off. I didn't used to wear a headscarf. It was just for that particular school session to learn Arabic. They pulled my headscarf off. They pushed me and they called me the names under the sun, which I don't want to repeat. I think that was the defining moment for me, to work in the equality field, to resonate with discrimination and difference. And if you were to ask me of all the career choices that I eventually took in the North East, every single one of those choices, not in London where I worked in international banking and airline, but certainly all the choices that I made in the North East are defined by that experience. And it's important that you recognise vulnerability, but also look at the vulnerability as power.
That's an interesting way of reframing it. And what would you like to say to those people now who did that to you?
I can't use expletives, so we'll leave that for another day. But what I would like to say to them is not thank you, but I would like to say, because of what you did, you've encouraged me to be who I am today. And I think that for me, that self-belief that even in your lowest point, even in your really dark moment, what becomes important to you suddenly comes forward to you like flashing lights. And it's only when you grow older do you realise that trauma that you experienced when you were younger is your inspiration to change that happening to others. And I think, education, future generations are where we should be working on to ensure that gender equality exists, to ensure that discrimination doesn't. And I think young people who are our future leaders are really important in challenging that status quo and being part of that solution to change.
Brilliant. It's amazing how you turned that trauma into your success or your motivation to become so successful. What would you say is your greatest success?
I think one of the greatest things that I feel, apart from my wonderful daughter who's in the audience, and I have to say thank you to being so amazing, I think one of the things that was really one of the greatest and probably one of the most painful things I had to do was to challenge England and Wales police forces in the way that they treated victims of sexual abuse from marginalised communities. The Home Office, the Independent Office for Police Complaints, and the College of Policing asked charities to come forward and identify a feature of policing which caused the public harm. Because of the work that we do at the programme, it was really clear to me that this was the defining area of work I wanted policing to change. It was a 4-year program of researching, speaking to victims and survivors, to speaking to police forces in England and in Wales, to put forward a really strong business case for change. That was presented to Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabulary and Fire Service, and they upheld the complaint, and that was issued in 2020. And as a result of that complaint, that is now transforming police policy in England and in Wales. They are being issued with new guidance around training and new processes and procedures. Has that changed for victims? I'm not quite sure we're there yet. In fact, I can say with confidence we've got a long way to go. But it's made policing have a light shone on the discrimination that victims who have suffered extreme trauma from not experience that in the future. So for me, that's been the greatest achievement done with a team, but spearheaded by the work of the charity, which I'm really, really proud of.
It's quite an achievement. So it's clearly been quite a long, drawn-out battle. Were there any moments when you thought about giving up?
Many moments, and those moments were generally when I understood how much more challenge was required. Although that report was published a couple of years ago, the implementation of those recommendations is still a constant challenge. I'm working with the National Police Chiefs Council, who have got an experienced portfolio lead in making sure those recommendations can be implemented. And that's the upward struggle. It's constant, but this is what the report has identified. But we're doing this to change the way that we are undertaking investigations. But you're not doing that because we're speaking to victims. So that is a constant. Although the report was done, the chapter is not closed. It's an ongoing, relentless piece of work that I'm doing to make sure that leaders in policing and in the inspectorate hold police forces to account.
And hopefully that chapter will close and there'll be real change soon. When that happens, what's the next challenge for you?
One of the things that I really am keen to do is work with students in universities. We have developed a brilliant education tool called the Halo Student Hubs. But I was contacted earlier on this year by an uncle who tragically lost his niece to a violent perpetrator in a London university. And he was really keen to do some legacy work for her. She originated from India. She lived in Dubai, was educated in Dubai, and came to London to build her dreams on a future in law. Unfortunately, she became familiar with a perpetrator who brutally murdered her. But in some of that legacy work, he wants to establish a UK and global program to ensure the safety of students, because there was some work done on student safety about 5 years ago, which we were asked to be part of, and it was called Not on My Campus, where over 66% of students said they'd experienced some form of sexual harassment on campus. Equally disturbing, only 2% felt safe enough to report it. So for me, that has become a personal ambition and challenge of mine to make sure that students feel safe, international students can thrive. So the next thing would be to look at a global movement to ensure students, wherever they are, can have the safe environment that is every right for every young girl.
That's just shocking, those statistics. I can't believe that.
Yeah.
So are you kind of developing like an app as part of the hub to help them?
We currently have hubs in Durham, our flagship program. We have one in Teesside University, Manchester Met, and we're also exploring with other universities. As a governor of Teesside University, we're really keen to look at safeguarding, and it's also one of the conditions that is now being brought in by the National Union of Students. But I think this is really important. The tool is going to be really a helpline, a confidential helpline for students who feel safe, who don't feel safe, for their friends to call in as their advocates, as their peers, to make sure that any sign of unsafe behaviour or perpetrator or anything like that can be reported. It can be anonymous, and there's a team of dedicated specialist staff who can respond and provide safety advice by working with the university, if appropriate, to put the safeguard in place. So essentially, it will be a student helpline.
Okay, excellent. And sounds like it's well needed. You must experience some quite traumatic events and stories that your people who come to the charity tell you. How do you cope with hearing all those things and sometimes seeing it for yourself?
We have a great team at Halo. We laugh a lot and we eat a lot of rubbish. Mostly drink a lot of coffee. But I think that peer comradeship with women who understand the trauma, who may not want to share their story on stages, but they have experienced similar, are really the biggest levers in support. We have trustees who are also really empowered to support our staff. And I think to have that network is so important, because you're quite right. It can be very lonely and it can get very, very dark. But seeing the women that we support is probably the biggest comfort and inspiration. We have had women who have literally left with nothing other than the children and the clothes that they're wearing. They are now doing degrees. They now have set up micro businesses. When you look and listen to them, they give us the absolute fuel to carry on and to really repurpose why we're doing this. And they are just the biggest inspiration for us at the charity.
Brilliant. That's lovely to hear. And who inspires you?
For me, inspiration can be found in many forms. I find inspiration on a daily basis. But if I look at somebody who really has made me think about inspiration, is my mother and I suppose my daughter. I do love listening to Malala Yousafzai. I think she's an amazing advocate for women's rights. And I do admire her. But I also admire men like, Nelson Mandela and Nazir Afzal. You know, what they do for women's rights in some cases, specifically Nazir Afzal, what my father has taught me are huge inspirations. And sometimes when it gets too much, I think about my daughter's future and her daughter or son's future, and I think, that has to change. And I think we've all got a responsibility, but inspiration can come in many forms. And for me, it doesn't necessarily attribute to one person. It's an inspiration in the women we support, inspiration in the family that I come from, and inspiration on a daily basis. I've heard some amazing women on stage today. I've met some super women in the break. And, I work with amazing women. And honestly, sometimes you need daily inspiration.
Oh, absolutely. What are your hopes for the future, Yasmin?
I hope that things do get better. I believe that they really will. But I believe that we've all got a role to play in making things better for others. I think that when you are confronted with barriers, you want to do what you can to make sure those barriers don't exist for the next generation. So my absolute ambition is to ensure that women can really get the help that they need, be empowered by other women that they know, and they become the inspiration for others. I think it's so important not to lose hope. If you listen to the news, and I don't suggest that you do for 1 minute right now, the geopolitics that go on, women are so powerful. Why is it that women aren't on negotiation tables for conflict? Because things would be very different if they were. So I think we've really got to push forward women that we know and push forward women that come to our contact to be part of that narrative to change for a better world. And I think we can do that. Women have a great role to play. So do men, but women have the tools and they have the absolute drive to push forward for change.
Absolutely, totally believe that. A lot of the women that I know, many in this room, there's so much capability, but sometimes I feel lacks, certainly with myself and others, is the belief. But yeah, the belief's so important. You've got to believe that you can to change things.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really helped me was when I really wanted a fantastic opportunity for a job. And somebody came to my house and they said, "Why are you going for this job? Because you do know this is kind of earmarked for this individual." And I did have that belief, but I had passion much more. I went for that job for experience and shock, I got the job. But if I'd listened to somebody who challenged my belief, then perhaps I wouldn't be where I am today. So belief is really important, but sometimes it's about timing too. And I'm a true believer that if you give, you get back for sure. And timing is also at the essence. If you don't get what you want at that time, there'll be another time that's right for you.
Yes, and timing is of the essence at the moment. We've got about 1 minute left. My last question, what message would you give to that young 7-year-old Yasmin, and indeed to any young women, perhaps in the audience today or who listen to this?
I think it's really important in terms of the role that we have for younger generations. I mentioned how important education is, and working in universities and schools is probably where we can make the most impact. But if there was a younger Yasmin, firstly I would say, what were you doing about that fringe? Why did you have that haircut? And then I would say to her, you go girl. But then the message I would give to the young Yasmin is never ever stop having the dreams that you have. When I was young, I wanted to become an ambassador. Not the ones that gave out Ferrero Rochers, but the ambassador that really could represent women. And I never ever thought I'd achieve that. If there was anywhere that I could achieve that, it was probably going to be London, right? But I felt that I've made more impact by building an army of supporters in the North East. And that's where the impact has been made. So I would say to every young person, it really is a case of believing in what you can achieve, having dreams because they do come true, and making sure that you take others with you on any journey that has worked out well for you. You impart what has worked and what hasn't worked, and you just really celebrate being who you are and what you want to do in the future.
That's an incredible message, Yasmin. Thank you so much. Yasmin, everyone. Hello from the Personal Podcast studio. We have just headed over here from Middlesbrough Town Hall, where we recorded the 50th podcast episode live at TedXTeessideWomen, which was an experience. How did you find it, Yasmin?
I found it brilliant. The room was full of such high energy. The women in the room were amazing. The men were supportive. It was just fab to have it here in Teesside. It really was.
It was wonderful. And I totally agree about the energy. And yeah, it was strange. It was very different doing a podcast where there was a live audience, where you had some reaction. And, you know, some of the things we talked about, even briefly, were quite shocking. So it was nice to kind of, you did feel that support coming through.
Most definitely. I think, you know, people who were in the audience, even in the breaks that I went to, they were like, wow, this is amazing. And it wasn't just because of the speakers, but the energy in that room. Everybody was there for a reason. They were so, you know, passionate about the particular areas that were going to be explored. And sometimes those don't get the kind of shine that they need. So no. I think it was such a unique opportunity in Teesside, and I think it went down a storm. I really do.
I agree. And the theme of TEDx Teesside Women was elevating voice. And that's obviously a part of this podcast. Why do you think it's so important that we should elevate our voices and share our stories and experiences?
I think it's so important to have a voice that can be shared and can resonate and empower other people to change. One of the things that we do at the charity is support women who've been abused. And, you know, if you look at the news at the moment, if you look at the media, almost every week there are high-profile celebrities. There have been murders in communities. We don't talk about this enough, because when we use our voice, what tends to happen is there will be somebody that something you've said resonates with them. There'll be somebody who will wait for somebody to speak about a similarity that they have experienced, and that makes them breathe a sigh of relief. It may make them take an action that they wouldn't have ordinarily done. So never, ever underestimate the power of voice. And we talk about it, don't we, Charlotte, all the time. Everyone has a voice. Sometimes it's important to use that voice for others.
And we talked about that bystander and the role that can play, and how we all are responsible for what's happening in our society. I think that was really impactful, because quite often we think, well, it wasn't me that said that, you know, I didn't do it, but you heard that and you didn't say anything about it. So that's going to be something that I'm going to try and make more changes about in my own life.
I've experienced this so much in terms of when I listen to women, when I've worked in places, when I have been spoken to, or when derogative terms have been made by, you know, communities that I don't represent, I would always challenge that. And I think what we've got to get used to, if we are really going to be having meaningful change in society and workplaces, is when somebody around you speaks about some form of discrimination, it's not that person who's at the firing line who needs to speak up. You've got a responsibility. So I would advocate that voice and that bystander approach to anything, because that is so powerful for the person who is experiencing that discrimination. It is so important for us to become that champion, to become that ally of a person who, quite frankly, is being treated unfairly.
And do you think it's fear that sometimes stops people from speaking out?
I think it's an absolute fear of being unpopular. It's a fear of, well, they may not go out with me socially anymore because I've spoken up about something which was the norm in our conversations. But, you know, I think it's so important for people and everyone to think about what their actions might be able to create. And by sometimes speaking out, you may be the only time that something somebody else has said has become challenged. But that instigates change. So I think it's so important for us to know what our role is making difference for people who really need you to be their allies.
Yes, and Michaela said earlier on, it's that uncomfortable conversations stimulate this change. I think that's exactly what you're saying there as well. Standing up, yes, you're going to be a little bit afraid, speak your mind and say what you think's right or wrong.
Yeah, and I've been involved in lots of reviews recently, which have been, you know, harrowing to listen to, the experiences of, you know, employees who've been abused, employees who've been discriminated. And often when you look at what was the root cause, it was the culture in that team. It was the culture of that organisation. And if big blue light organisations like the London Fire Brigade, which is what I was involved in as an independent panel member, have highlighted disturbing behaviour by leaders, then it goes to show just how important that role is around challenging. Because if you're accepting of that behaviour and if you're a bystander, then you are also part of the problem. I think it's important to say that and be bold about saying that.
Yeah, that's important. So we're going to dive back into some of the more personal questions here. The question I opened with was, what was the most significant challenge you faced in your life, in your personal life? You kind of touched on kind of leaving a very difficult situation. I wondered if we could go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's not something I speak about often, but sometimes it needs to be said. I left a vibrant cosmopolitan city in England, London. I was afforded with all the opportunities of being in a career that I loved, wearing what I wanted to and going out within reason to where I wanted to with my friends. But I came to move to the Northeast, and unfortunately there were restrictions placed upon me in terms of the clothes that I wore, the friends that I decided I wanted to have in my life, and even about having a job. You know, those were the freedoms I took for granted being brought up in London, I suppose. So it was really, really challenging. It was probably one of the most difficult periods of my life where I had to conform, where I needed to really harbour my voice and my choices, because that was the norm in the family that I was going into. And that was really difficult. It was really challenging, Charlotte. And one of the things that got me through all of that was words that my father used to use. And he said to me one day, Yasmin, there will always be two ways to get to something. One is going to be an easy option, and one is going to be the most difficult route to get to where you want to be. And I felt that this was a personality building, a character building exercise, which taught me some really valuable lessons and that have really helped me creating that resilience and moving forward with passion about something that I wanted to create. And I did through the charity that I set up, and also working with the government on advising ministers and the government colleagues about what they need to do to improve those choices for women and to eliminate harm. And I think, you know, my story is really important, but my story isn't alone. And, you know, I think by sharing that, I know that others will resonate with what they went through. And I think it's important that we use our voice and sometimes our story so that others can understand that something is not acceptable. So although it was very challenging, it also presented me with great opportunities to put that challenge and put that trauma to use through the program of work that now I am involved in. And it's something that has really made me much stronger.
And I bet you didn't feel that way at the time as you were leaving.
I definitely didn't feel that way. I honestly thought that this was the way that life would be. I thought that there was no way out of this. And I also thought that perhaps I should just get used to this because this is my new life. But something inside me really made me believe in that there is a better. Something inside me made me realize what was acceptable and not acceptable. And I suppose that drive and that absolute belief that I want to break that mold for my daughter and I want to make my son understand that that is not acceptable and making sure that I moved forward. And I knew it was going to be difficult. I knew that. But what I absolutely believed in, and I think is so important in this dreary landscape of news and media, that we always remain positive, because that really pushed forward my reasoning to change what could have been a very dark future for me.
It's really inspiring to hear. Does that still fuel you today?
It fuels me absolutely, but what fuels me more is the women that I meet. You know, sometimes they're friends and sometimes they're people that we support in the charity. Just when you think that you cannot hear a more harrowing story on a monthly, weekly, daily basis, I speak to strong women who have, you know, come from another country with no language, who've been kept as modern day slaves, who've been exploited. And when I listen to them and I hear about the journey that they've taken and listen to what has made a difference to them, you know, that has to be the impetus, that has to be the inspiration. And you always think, wow, how did you achieve that? So women and men can be so powerful in breaking that mold, you know, really changing the status quo for future generations. And I think, you know, we need to listen to what people are saying to us and making sure that what role we have to help them build a better future.
Yeah, and again, it's uncomfortable to listen to. Some of the stories today, harrowing. You know, the things, I mean, you just don't even think these things go on. And if they do, you think, oh, it's far away from here, which still isn't okay. So I just, it's incredible that you're able to listen to the stories and do something about it and then inspire people through the strength of these women who've been through the trauma and gone on to achieve incredible things.
Yeah, I think data and statistics is really important right now. You know, 1 in 5 women have been abused. 1 in 4 women have been sexually abused. And there's a lot that sits beneath those statistics. There are many women and men who aren't featured in that data because they haven't sought the help that they want or they need. So I think please remember that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely.
You know, in every community, in every local authority, abuse exists. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we uncover some of those barriers for particular groups to come forward because they feel shame. They feel that they're going to break an honor code. They feel that sometimes when it's families who are the perpetrators, not just your partner, that they feel they're going against an entire system. They're not going to come out and reach for help. But when they listen to other women or men's stories, similar experiences as they have, that just may make them think about the choices that they have. And by working with particular projects and programs, that there's always going to be help out there for women. And I think the charity's proven that. You're quite right, Charlotte, you know, when we started this journey in 2011, we were waiting for the phone to ring, you know, because we didn't really, when you raise awareness, people come forward, women come forward. In 2024, we have had a exponential 76% increase in our referrals year on year.
Wow.
We have now the most complex high-risk cases that we're supporting. We are constantly challenging statutory services about the impact of them not providing the right service for women. So this is profound. This is absolutely increasing. So that's why we can never stop talking about it. We've got to have a relentless pursuit in tackling all forms of harm and discrimination.
Oh, it's absolutely shocking and disgusting. And you do kind of lose faith in humanity a little bit, don't you? You must do, hearing all these stories.
It is very hard sometimes to see where there's going to be a glimmer of light and glimmer of hope. And when there are, victims and survivors who are in constant upward barrier about a service not doing what they should be doing, being failed by another service, for us to say, come forward, we can help you, and then to transfer the support to another agency and then being failed by them. Sometimes it's really, really hard, Charlotte, to see the light through all of that. But this is the beauty of working with a fantastic team who are really advocates for women who are faced with those challenges. And I think by really believing in what we do, by having the right tools and the mechanisms by which we can challenge the services that are not doing what they should be doing, can we really start to see that light? Mm-hmm. We all need some light, and the women that we support are so much of an inspiration of the work we do. And we have a fantastic team. We have great trustees who really understand our mission and they help us achieve it.
Yeah, I just met some of them. They seemed fabulous as well. And I just met your daughter as well, very briefly.
Yeah.
How did having a daughter, or even, her son, you've got a daughter and a son, how did having children change you?
I think it made me really think about the kind of future and legacy that I want to leave. It made me realize that I have huge responsibilities, not just for bringing them up to be good humans, but almost to set an example of what good and bad looks like. It gave me a responsibility to make sure that the moral compass was one which was embedded around equality, and to not put up with discrimination. So for me, having children really inspires me to make this world a better place. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's about what am I going to do to help them have a better future, and what are they going to ultimately do. And although they won't have the same pathways I have, but they'll definitely have a responsibility to push forward for change and to challenge discrimination wherever it exists. So they've been my absolute inspiration, but they also are, people that are going to be future leaders. And it's really important that they know what is acceptable, and that what being a good human is. It's not about always working for yourself or challenging what's right for you. It's listen to people who are vulnerable, listening to people who need your help, and what role they have in pushing forward for change.
Mm-hmm. And at least you must have so much pride in yourself, knowing that you are almost on that front line pushing for change. It's easy for me to say, I'm trying to make the world better for you, but at the end of the day, I'm not doing the things that you're doing. So that must feel really, empowering for them to see as well.
I think it's important for them to have some clarity on what change might look like through the work that I do. But I think, we all have a part to play. So if you're working in an organisation and some policies being implemented that actually puts a particular group at a disadvantage, you may have done something to change that policy for others. So it's not just about what I'm doing, it's what each of us can do. We have this, and I mentioned it earlier, but we have this notion around domestic abuse that it's everybody's business. So it's not about me or what I do, it's about what everybody does. And I think, we all got a part to play in this wonderful mystery called life. And I think we can all be the voice for others. And I think that's really powerful.
I agree. I know. It's a really lovely way of you putting it as well. We're all responsible for society and culture. You touched on your father and the wonderful wise words he shared with you over the course of his life. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. What would you want to say to him if he's alive, or if you had one last chance to have a conversation?
Apart from really reluctantly saying, Dad, you were right, And, you know, the things that I now do, I turn the lights off. And when he used to say to me, Yasmin, make sure you turn the lights off or the plugs are off. And I was like, why? But why? But now I think, yeah, I know why, because I'm saying it to my children. But one of the things that I really want to thank him for is for being selfless. He came from the South Asian community. He migrated typically when we saw the wave of migration in the late 60s, early 70s, and slightly before. He came with no language in terms of English. He had no formal education. But he strived to work in Ford Mechanics in Essex. He started to work in politics. He didn't really have a mandate, but he knew that he wanted to change things for the better of his community and people like him. So I would really want to say, wow, Dad, thank you for doing things which you personally didn't think you could achieve, and for setting some really strong standards for us as children. And those strong standards were really based around there's right and wrong in life, and don't be passive in your cause to make things change for better for the community. You know, he was so good. He set up a charity in South Asia. He was always working, you know, but it was his number that the community would call if there was a problem. You know, he was the one who helped build a community centre in Ilford, you know, and he was really a huge instigator in that. He didn't look at his qualifications because he had none. He didn't look at, you know, whether it was right to do or whether he knew that was too difficult by compromising time with us. He did something that was quite selfless, really, if you look at all the things I've explained. So I would just like to say, you know, thank you for paving the way of making a change. And imposter syndrome, you and I spoke about that a bit earlier on. You know, he had imposter syndrome all his life, but that did not stop him because he was very passionate about what he believed in. And I just would say to him, you know, the things that you have taught us have been absolutely critical in achieving what we've done today. And that's for all my siblings.
Oh, he sounds wonderful. And yes, imposter syndrome, it's a good point you made about how he just almost felt the fear of it and pushed on anyway. Do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome? And if you do, how do you deal with it?
Charlotte, all the time, every day, doing this interview, doing the podcast that we just did, the TED Talk. I've got an event on Friday. I do have imposter syndrome, but I also think around me that if I don't show my daughter, if I don't show my colleagues, if I don't show young girls in that audience that you can do this because you look like me, you know, you're from that community. We don't have visible platforms. So if I really hold that in high regard and I put that right at the forefront of my nerves. Every day I speak to amazing women. You know, I meet the most incredible women who've been through really difficult times, and every single woman I've spoken to has said they felt imposter syndrome. That never goes away, that stays with you, but you become better at dealing with that feeling just as you're about to go into interview, just when you're about to go into that stage. So if people say they don't get nervous or they don't feel that way, that they shouldn't be here, you're absolutely in the right place, because that's exactly where you should be.
Absolutely. And we've spoken about voice, and this is like your internal voice, isn't it? And sometimes it isn't very kind.
It isn't. It's like, you know, when you have a duck on the pond, and we all know the analogy.
Yeah.
You know, don't think for 1 second that somebody who's speaking publicly isn't feeling anxious. The adrenaline sometimes takes over. We've just done some brilliant breath work, haven't we?
Yes.
And I was doing that before we went on stage, and that really, really helped me.
Yes.
Because, you know, taking that leap of faith is a step forward to doing what you know you're capable of. And it's all right to feel that way sometimes, where you think, should I really be on this stage? Somebody else needs to and deserves to be on this stage. But we've all got a role to play, haven't we? And Absolutely. I think it's just about not comparing yourself to others, but being true to who you are. And you can never go wrong with that.
No, totally. Being your true self, true authentic self. We are now moving on to the parts where it's the regular 10 questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, how would you rate yourself at the following things? Yasmin, how good looking are you?
Oh, that's horrible,
It is
Charlotte.
horrible,
That's a
yes.
horrible question.
It is.
A rating. I'm going to say 5 because sometimes I feel good and sometimes I don't feel great.
Okay, well, I think that's very harsh, but it's all about what you think. How funny do you think you are?
8.
Brilliant. How good at cooking?
10.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
What's your signature dish?
Biryani, chicken biryani. Honestly, people will come to my house because I'm making dinner. And once they know chicken biryani is on the menu, they flock.
Wow. How good at singing are you?
2. Doesn't stop me from singing though.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that. We talked, it was one of the TED Talks, I don't know if you saw it, about drinking alcohol and the correlation with depression. Do you drink?
No.
No? You've never drank?
Nope.
Part of your culture?
It's part of the culture,
Yes,
yeah. And to
yep.
be honest with you, I've never really missed it. It's not something that's a driver for me for going out. I can be super crazy without the alcohol. I dread to think what alcohol would do to me in the mix.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. I rarely drink these days and I feel so much better for it. Raising children, quite a contentious one.
8.
Excellent. How good a friend are you?
9, I'm a Scorpio.
Oh, okay.
I am a very loyal friend.
Oh, lovely. How intelligent are you?
I would say 8. I've got a master's, but I don't think that's why I feel I'm intelligent. I feel my life experiences have given me the 8 mark.
Absolutely. You can tell you're very emotionally intelligent as well. How kind are you?
9.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Yasmin. It's been
Thank
totally
you.
different experience, this one, doing it live than back to the studio, but you have been remarkable. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Charlotte.